Hello and welcome to Talking About My Generation. It's the podcast where we try to bring in a view from multiple generations, if possible. Of course, Alisha Vassar is with us over here,
Hi.
and our own guru, Rich Grego, is with us. So today we're going to talk about purpose. We're going to talk about pleasure, and we're going to talk about happiness. And we're going to talk about contentment and see how all these kind of connect with each other and whether or not we can come up with an idea on how to make our lives just a little bit richer. So the first thing I'm going to do is just mention the whole idea that we've got these words that we constantly talk about, and we've got these feelings that we hold every day. And the question is are we trying to get to a greater level of whether it's momentary pleasure and overall a greater level of long-lasting happiness? And then where does contentment fit in between there? And I've got just the two greatest people who I want to have this conversation with to explore it. So I think what I'm going to do is, Alicia, I'm going to go ahead and pose the question to you. Um, when we talk about happiness and we talk about contentment, what do you think about, and how does it influence you?
So I do think there's a very distinct difference between the two of contentment and happiness. And it was when you posed the question for me, it kind of gave me an idea of it feels like contentment's in the moment, something that it may be comfortable uh, in that time. And it seems to be grounded in that like current time that you're content and okay. When it feels like happiness seems to go beyond that, and it goes instead of focusing on that one moment, it goes on into even the future.
Yeah. I think there's no doubt that there's that relationship, and that's going to be the harder one, I think, contentment and happiness. But yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense. That contentment, whether I'm content right now versus happiness, kind of an overall idea. Um, Rich, what do you think?
Great. One thing I was really impressed by is the distinction when you sent out this idea for a topic of discussion. You made a great differentiation in the way you defined pleasure versus contentment versus happiness. Because I mean, if you want to look at it sort of philosophically, like formally in terms of schools of philosophy, there's definitely you can almost label them according to those three kind of definitions in terms of the ways of life they advocate. And I think, again, Alicia's definition is slightly different than yours. I mean, you can use any definitions we want, I
Mhm.
suppose, right? And they're all good. But I thought that was a really constructive way to differentiate between the two anyway. So,
Yeah, yeah, and so pleasure as we see it, right, is momentary.
yeah,
There's no doubt. I go and I'm having a meal. It's a pleasurable meal.
yeah,
Mhm.
I go to buy a car. Of course, that's not always a pleasurable experience, but you get a sense of happiness in kind of in a short situation when you drive out and you feel happy, right? For that particular moment. But then what happens is that level of happiness that you have, and that's why we call it pleasure, that dies down. The car becomes a tool. You drive to work and home and pick up the kids, and that seems to just kind of you're not feeling that sense of happiness and joy and pleasure every time. Does that tool bring you contentment as long as it doesn't break down? And I would have to say yes, right? And so how what would you say, Rich, is the relationship then between pleasure and happiness?
yeah. Well, it depends on who you ask, right? I mean, I guess, yeah. But Like really briefly, I'd say philosophically, when we talk about pleasure, and I think the way you were talking about it, and even Alicia, I think I would, well, you tell me if you agree with that or not, Alicia. But I think, this philosophy that's commonly called hedonism. I mean, what the hell? Everybody knows what
Ooh.
hedonism is, right? They're resorts, right? In the Caribbean, I think, right? That are named after hedonism, which sort of defines pleasure as just a feeling of usually physical, but also could be emotional kind of gratification. Yeah, just well, I don't know what joy, pleasure. I'm reusing the word. It's a gratifying feeling. Whereas contentment, if you look at other philosophies, and again, I think everybody has that definition of maybe I don't know if they have the definition of pleasure, but they recognize that experience, right? Because every 5-year-old child is a hedonist, I guess, right? Every college student on spring break is a hedonist. And we are, right? When we're off on vacation, I guess we're
Sure.
hedonists, and I guess some people live their whole lives around that. Addicts are hedonists, I suppose,
At
right?
least they try. Yeah, sure, sure.
No matter what you're addicted to, that's what you're looking for, the one feeling of pleasure after another. But contentment, then, right? There's another philosophy called Stoicism. Again, everybody's heard of Stoicism, and people usually use that word when they say, you handled that stoically, meaning you kept a stiff upper lip and you didn't get swayed by the emotions and the feelings of pleasure and pain around you, but you kept your rational composure. And again, I think that's like if you're what we call a professional, I suppose, whether you're a soldier or a doctor or whatever. When we want people to be what we call professional, we kind of want them to be stoic, don't we? We want them to do their duty regardless, or do what what they're supposed to do, or maintain their emotional equanimity no matter what's going on around them. And right, there are a lot of people. I get the impression Alisha is kind of like that. I don't know, but I just get that sense of you. And then there's what I think Herb means by happiness, and you correct me. You guys both correct me if you think I'm wrong. But knowing Herb for over a quarter of a century now, my sense is that what you mean by happiness when you use it is sort of this Aristotelian notion, and Aristotle, again, another ancient Greek philosopher, I don't know why I'm coming back to them, who talks about, what's it called? Eudaimonia, I believe it's what it's called in the Greek. It's what Abe Maslow would call, maybe the psychologist would call, what does he call it, guys? What is that word?
Self-fulfillment.
Self-actualization. Self-actualization.
Self-actualization. Yeah, self-actualization. It's not so much taking joy in fleeting feelings of pleasure or pain, right? But it's something bigger than that, right? It's the satisfaction of having achieved something that you really in a heartfelt way feel is right. And that could very well involve a lot maybe of moments of pain and even suffering, right? But you take a certain kind of joy that's above and beyond simple pleasure in that moment. And I guess that's the way I see all three of those things. And whichever one you find is the most important, maybe it depends on what you want to do with your life. But correct me if I'm wrong, Herb. That version of happiness probably is what Steve Covey would also consider happiness, right? I guess a guy like Steve Covey, you guys would know better than
Oh,
I.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I completely agree. Alicia, you want to chime in?
I thought it was really interesting, the connotations that kind of came with each one that we were talking about. Pleasure, we found a lot more negative connotations. We found there like addiction, hedonism, I think a lot more negative things. Contentment, it's a little bit better. Stoicism is this idea that um, you are good at what you're doing. You're clear-minded. You're thinking things through. There's a lot more positivity there. And then I think once you hit that happiness, that's where you're like, there's really great feelings and emotions there.
That's excellent.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like that.
yeah. That's really good. And Alicia, as we kind of go on a little bit and talk a little bit um, this morning, I just want to hear a little bit more about what you think your generation feels in this area of where do they get their pleasure from. And I'll bait you with the technology factor there.
Yeah.
And then, and then this sense of contentment. Now, again, we have to be cautious because um, is it a generational thing or is it an age thing? Because
Hmm.
again, when I was in my 20s, I don't know that I can say that I was content.
Excellent.
Uh, I think that there were times when I was seeking a lot of pleasure. There was no doubt about that in my 20s, right? In 20s and 30s, seeking that and believing that that would get me to happiness. But then also in that area too, I was working, I was trying to get to the next level of my job. So, and that's where, Rich, you talk about how I define
Hmm.
a higher level of happiness within an individual as long as they've got that sense of purpose
Yeah.
and they're trying to achieve something.
Mm.
So, somehow, in all of my studies and readings and experiences and talking to people and everything else, I connect happiness truly with experience. Now, again, it's not the only area, obviously, being around family, being around friends, that connectivity, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That brings that level of happiness too. But then the question is, we've got that middle part, which is contentment, and I think this is the one that we I think it's harder to define
Hmm.
because because it's somewhere in between that pleasure, which of course that we want, because will a certain amount of pleasure bring us contentment? I don't know. Maybe it will. Maybe it will not. Maybe if we're, again, as Rich mentioned, if we continue to just seek pleasurable things, then we're not content because we're constantly seeking the pleasure, right? Whereas if we're content, maybe we look at ourselves and say, "Hey, I've been pretty content for a while now. I'm pretty happy," and we kind of fold that in. What do you think, Alicia?
So I kind of see it as that contentment as that middle part of trying, being able to get to that experience, to try to get to that uh,
Mm.
happiness at the end of it. And then I see that happiness is kind of connected to those communal things, because I feel like it expands, I guess, that happiness. It's that growth, that self-actualization that we were talking about. When we're talking about generationally, I thought it was I feel like all of us have vices that like pleasure would fall along. And I feel like we're all vulnerable to it. However, I think because as a Gen Z, we've grown up around technology, we can be a little bit more gun-ho about jumping into any of it. And I feel like that it creates kind of a culture of seeking out pleasure in quick, what I usually call is like dopamine fixes, because you're getting little spikes of dopamine when you're scrolling through your phone. Like my favorite thing in the world is reels or like TikToks where you can get little bite-sized bits of content, but you can just keep going. Like there's scientific studies on the effects of it, of how like it alters your brain really. I also think of substance abuse and how easily accessible it is. I think of vaping. It's a very common, and it's those little dopamine kind of hits. What else is there? I think it's just technology in general. It can be very easy for my generation to fall into those kind of traps of pleasure. I think there's for each generation specific things, but I think technology has been very interesting.
Rich, what do you think?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. That was excellent, incidentally, Alicia. I love the notion of, because I think the Stoics would agree with you, and I like Stoicism a lot. I think it's got a lot to commend to it. But I think there's a state they call autarkia, I think is the Greek word, where they see unless I'm misunderstanding you, it almost is it's almost as though you envision that state of contentment, which is what the Stoics
Mhm.
strive for, as kind of a vehicle from just being a creature of pleasurable drives
Mhm.
to somebody who is generally self self-fulfilled, what the heck is the word again?
This word's tripping us up today.
Self-actualized, really like a vehicle between, right? It's just being at the mercy of your pleasurable whims to getting to what we would call maybe self-actualization.
Mhm.
And I think that's the way the Stoics looked at that kind of state of mind. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And maybe that's a good way to approach, as long as we're talking about technologies like, doom scrolling on the internet, or Facebook, or anything else you get caught up in and start developing emotional attachments to, and fix your self-identity to and stuff after a while. Maybe, developing that kind of stoic, they might call it detachment, which is sort of but maybe it's just sort of a better word would be emotional equanimity, toward using those things so that you can enjoy them without becoming a victim of your own enjoyment and having your happiness, pleasure dependent on those technologies. And as you allude to as well, technology makes that really easy. It
Mhm.
makes addiction really easy, because it just gives you so much stimulation all the time, whenever you want it, as fast as you want it. But you can be that way, right, with everything, with food, with substance, with other substances, with work, for that matter. I've
That's
accused Herb of that at times.
I think that's interesting, because I think that's the fact that I was trying to get across with each generation has. Because when I read a lot of James Baldwin's work, he talks about this culture of isolation within the U.S. And I think in a modern context, technology has allowed that isolation to get even worse. I
Yeah,
mean, we've talked before about how AI um, can kind of cut out the people part of your work. It can do it for all aspects of your life.
brilliant. Yes.
Yeah, and Alicia, so in my class, there's two of my classes that I bring up the measurement of quality of life and standard of living, and that's in my organizational behavior class and my international business. International business, what we do is we compare the United States, of course, where I mainly teach, with other countries around the world. And then, of course, in my organizational behavior class, we're talking about it just within the confines of the United States and corporations and companies and organizations and how they behave here. And as I was researching a little bit of what we were talking about, and look at what I'm trying to convey to a lot of my students, and that is, I think what we've done is we've recognized to some degree that standard of living is connected to contentment, quality, right? And then quality of life is happiness. So as long as our standard of living is good and it's fair, we're able to pay our bills, and we're not doing anything crazy or whatever, but as long as our standard of living is where we think it should be, then we're content, right? But then what we want is we want a higher level of the happiness. So then what we look at this: is my life purposeful? Do I love raising my children? Do I have a job that I love to go to? Not just a job that meets paying the bills, but one that I truly enjoy going to. And then that'll raise that contentment to that happiness level. Now, again, this is all within the confines of what we are all talking about here. Everybody has their own idea, but I think, for lack of a better thought process, to make this of value, what we're trying to do is we're trying to recognize where we are. Where am I? Am I just seeking pleasure? Am I content? Is that okay? And that might be fine. There are some countries where the measurement of level of contentment is pretty good, and they're actually high on the happiness scale because they don't have a very low uh, um, situation where they're not happy. So as long as you're content, that's a higher level of feeling versus, not feeling unsafe, not being able to eat well, and then fall into that. So I guess, and again, I'll pose this to Alicia, and that is, what do you think about what your life is going to be in the happiness environment? Do you see yourself, like wherever you are right now, do you see yourself becoming happier later on in life? Or do you see yourself, wherever you are right now is about the way I'm going to be the rest of my life? That's actually, to me, that's pretty interesting.
So I think the goal, and I think for a lot of people, is to seek out that happiness. And for me, I feel like connection and community is a good portion of that. So for me, I've always seen it as like I am content, or I was content back in around, I want to say 2022, after I'd worked on my mental health. I had at 2022, I was starting my bachelor's degree. I was doing things that I was starting to be really proud of. But it wasn't until I connected with other people in 2024, I met my best friend and I met my partner, David. And that kind of took that, oh, I was okay before, to a much more joyous and a lot more long or future facing kind of happiness. And there's also like this idea that I get. I don't know if it was Bell Hooks or it was James Baldwin, but talking about the fact that l- love and it takes work. It's an action. I think it's Bell Hooks. Um, and through that action, you're helping someone else grow and you're helping yourself grow. So that's kind of where I see happiness. And that's for me, my goal.
Yeah, yeah. You bring up, and Rich, you brought up a couple of times, we talk about how the environment with people, being around people, and a lot of other countries, specifically South American countries, Spanish countries, Latin countries, there's a lot more connectivity. They spend a lot more time eating together, living together, different generations living together. And
The Nordic countries as well, just as you
the
know.
Nord, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and they do the same thing. And of course, as we know, the Nordic countries constantly are hitting the happiness scale all the time. For the last
right.
decade or
Yeah,
more, it's going to be Norway, it's going to be Denmark, it's going to be Sweden, right?
right.
So they're going to be hit with that. And then look at the United States. Here in the United States, a lot of us eat alone. We live alone. We're in the cars by ourselves going to work and everything else. And now, given the option, we want to work alone. We don't even want to work in an environment with other people. So, what does that really say about our true level of happiness? If we're
Mm.
talking about that happiness is brought on by being around others, we look at technology as being an environment where it has a barrier, then are we moving closer to or further away from happiness? Rich, what do you think?
Yeah, it's great. And incidentally, like, as I said to you when we were corresponding, bell hooks, James Baldwin are great sources of wisdom when you're trying to really look deeply at what's going on in our lives. And I think both of you guys, Herb and I've talked about this a million times, and you've alluded to it as well, that there's this sense in which technologies have also, besides giving us the pleasure addiction um, uh, delivery system that we want, also enable us to increase our isolation, which, in American culture, and I'm sure Bell Hooks and James Baldwin would agree with this, in
Mhm.
American culture has always been celebrated in terms of things like rugged individualism, right? Or bold people striking out on the lone wolf and all that kind of stuff, which, at least from a certain segment of American society, namely the people calling the shots, who it was very convenient for, incidentally, to push this narrative, right, have always celebrated. But if you look at just the empirical data alone about how our standard of living in so many respects, right, materially has increased exponentially over the last half century, 5 decades. While at the same time, if you look at some more subtle statistics from social psychology, levels of loneliness, levels of addiction, level of people saying they don't have a close friend, levels of people who spend amount of time people spend with their family, amount of times people spend out in their community, amount of the degree to which people say they trust other people, or our institutions. Which isn't surprising given our current social political situation either, right? And explains a lot. But all of those indicators that I think run a lot deeper than material standard of living, or GDP or anything like that, have gone exponentially in the opposite direction. So I think that's something very interesting. And looking at the causes of that, yeah, technology and all those other, and so many of our social institutions encourage it as well. But the spirit of capitalism encourages it, right? As Herb well knows, and that gets then imported into the workplace, as Herb well knows and has taught me. But I just wonder whether the root cause is not the institutions themselves, right? But that value system, that subtle psychology underlying all of those changes, which I think is what bell hooks and James Baldwin would heartily agree with. You tell me if I'm wrong, Alisha, Herb, I don't know.
Alisha, you want to chime in, or?
No, I definitely agree with it. And I think it is when Dr. Carter was bringing up the fact that the standard of living and all of these different things, it is interesting that we could see the standard of living going up as, for modern people, but then there's a never-ending onslaught of loneliness epidemics. I know particularly we talk about male loneliness, but really it's affecting every generation. It's in uh, every orientation is dealing with this level of loneliness, and it does feel culturally connected. I totally agree that the underlying kind of system kind of promotes this isolation. Um, but like I said, there's so many different factors that seem to be pushing us away from each other. And I think it's really key for people to understand that that connection was kind of key for us in the beginning. Or I think for all, we're social creatures. So it's kind of always been the thing that people have sought out and require.
Yeah, of course, my study is more so, again, kind of going back to the workplace and everything else. And we there's two rules of thought about the employee in the workplace, and that is, do we want a happy employee? Do we want employees to be happy? Do we bring in consultants to make our culture happier, right? There's that. And then there's another rule right there, say, well, we don't want to make our employees too happy. We want, because once they're happy, they're going to be content, and then they won't produce as much, and they'll just be enjoying work, and
That
not
true?
be and not being challenged. What's that?
I'm sorry, Herb. Is that true? Do you think that's at all? Is it at all true? I'm almost thinking we that seems nasty and mean spirited, but is there anything to that? That
Well,
overly contented workers aren't productive enough or aren't as productive?
Well, again, that's a great question. I mean, at what level? Uh, you know what? There's this measurement that if employees are very happy at work, then whenever there's something to be done, they're willing to do it. They want to go ahead and do
Mm-hmm.
it. But are they are they challenging themselves? Because if they're happy, and so why put yourself, and I think you almost alluded to it, where you're going through some pain. In other words, if I'm good at surfing, right, I might be the kind of surfer that I want to try new things, and do flips and everything else. But I could also be a surfer where, hey, I've gotten to the point where just getting up on the board and just riding the wave is good enough, right? And the question is how many of the workers do you have that, hey, I've achieved, my desk looks nice, my environment's okay, and I've done why do I have to seek more? And I think in the workplace, and maybe this is when I say more modern in the last 2 decades or so, that because there's a less level of trust among employees and the employer, that the employer is somewhat happy or content if the employee just does what they're told,
Hmm.
although ultimately they want more from them.
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
employee is trying to find a balance at work where they can just either survive and be content that happiness is just not going to be there.
Yeah.
And and I think what you have to do is you have to try to create the level of happiness and contentment that you believe your department or division creates so that individuals are happy with coming into work every day, but then also not so happy that they're not seeking challenges and coming up with new ideas. But again, you've got to have a management system, you've got to have a leadership system that when that individual tries things,
Mhm.
that that if they fail, they're not going to get persecuted for it. That there is a, hey, listen, this is what we were pushing you to do. We want you to try new things, and this is always that fight. And in the workplace today, I think what happens is there's not enough of the environment of wanting the employee, number one, to be happy, um, as well as wanting them to be motivated and driven to try new things, build new products, whatever it might be.
That kind of reminds me of the way that I see kind of contentment. I would see, or I would say instead of employees being happy, I would say the ones that are okay with where they're at are content. And I think those are kind of the ones uh, or the group that companies may be looking at and they're like they want more because it feels like happiness it would kind of boost on more of that creativity, wanting to be involved, wanting because I feel like that happiness is that kind of self-actualization. And I feel like self-actualization has to be met through growing and not being stagnant. I see that a lot more when we're talking about something like contentment. Even though I see it as a more positive word, I still see a level of stagnation with that. Um, I also kind of thinking about like the way we've talked before about the changing of workplaces. I would wonder from your opinion, do you think workplaces of the past were much happier because they had a lot more benefits? They had a lot, we talked about technology wasn't as in I guess invasive or it wasn't this the way it is now. But I would like, especially because you were making the book on corporations and how they can make their company a better place to work at.
It's a great question.
And of course, I've actually bored Rich with these talks, and that is, back in the '80s, back in the '70s and '80s, you had these motivational speakers. You had Zig Ziglar and Tom Peters, and Tony Robbins came up during that time and everything else. And an organization or a company that embraced that, trying to get individuals at that particular time. Sure, not everyone embraced the whole entire package, but the sense of, hey, you can do it, let's work together, you can achieve what you want, these kind of rah, rah, rahs going on, um, truly made the environment that much better. And then kind of going back to what I always talk about, and that is that sense of purpose. part of the motivation was, what's your purpose? What's your purpose in the organization? And I share this story. I do it every semester. I do it at the beginning of the semester. I do it at the end of the semester. Where at the beginning of the semester, I walk on campus and I walk around and I look at the buildings and before anybody gets there, I get pretty early. And I just say, are we going to achieve what we need to achieve, what we want to achieve? And that's to educate the individuals, the students, and make the environment pleasurable enough for them that they want to be they want the knowledge and learn. And then we go through the semester and we do what we need to do. And then at the end of the semester, I walk the halls, I walk the grounds, and then I think to myself, did we achieve what we wanted to? And I think I get that from, I used to start every morning with, okay, what's my mission today? And my background is healthcare administration, and that is to make sure that the patients are well taken care of, reduce their pain, making sure that the staff is well taken care of, and that create a good working environment for them. So this all came out of that time. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing as much of that or as much thought put into that as I believe I used to see. And when I talk to my students, or I go into organizations and I'm talking to employees don't talk about that. There's that level of enthusiasm and drive coming from management. Not all organizations, but many of them.
More so than or less so than 20, 25 years ago?
Yeah. I think so. I think that there's less of that. The terms that we often use is, I feel that it's more transactional. The looking at the two, transactional versus transformational. And I think in the transformational thing is where you have an employee coming in and you're trying to transform them to really understand their value to the organization. And I don't think that enough organizations are taking each individual employee and conveying their value to the organization. I just don't see that. And I think that we spend so much time in the workplace. We spend so much time there. Again, my background is that the workplace does have a major influence on individuals' happiness, especially if you work, right? And then I also think that the individuals in the workplace are interacting with other individuals and customers. And so if they're happy doing what they're doing, their level of happiness will be the transaction between themselves and the person receiving, the customer receiving the goods, services, whatever it might be, feels that too. It's not only just the transaction of the good or service, but it's how it's transacted, right? It's how it's delivered, as you would say. What do you think, Rich? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. What do you think, Alicia? That makes sense to me. I
So
get what
I,
you're
I
saying.
was interested in the idea of seeing it as transactional because I feel like it you would get a lot more happiness out of something that is less transactional because it's because it's already supposed to help both ends of it, that it feels like it may be making it a little bit colder than what people are ideally looking for in their workplace. Which it may be that's asking a lot, but I think especially from a generational perspective, I seek a lot more workplaces that want to. I think you've told me about this, that for you, having other people invest in you, having people give you opportunities was really key for you becoming the person you are today. And I believe very similar for myself. That's what I seek out in my workplaces.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um, so we can, as we try to make sense of everything that we've been talking about, we want pleasure, right? We want that dopamine. We want that short. Okay, we need those, and
Mhm.
we like that feeling, and we need to have that feeling, I believe, right? So we agree that there's that pleasure. The level of contentment is this feeling that things are okay, and that's where we want to be. Is that
Mhm.
what we agree with? That's um,
Sure.
and
I'd agree.
yeah,
I
and
agree.
yeah, and contentment can be on the cusp of happiness, right?
Sure.
It can be right there.
Maybe necessary for it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree.
And then happiness, which is what we're all striving to be happy, right? And we want to be happy all the time, right? Ideally, we want to be happy at work, we want to be happy with our family, we want to be happy with our friends, we want to be happy with the things that we do. But we also have to realize, in order to be happy, we recognize that sometimes we have to go through rough patches. And I think maybe uh, we can talk about this maybe in another segment, and talk about what are some of those painful things that we might go through or the fears that we might have, because overcoming those get us to our level of happiness. Would we agree on that?
Well said,
I
sir.
would say definitely agree with that, and Bell Hooks would agree with that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so would all the guys I mentioned.
Yeah,
Definitely,
of course.
definitely the self-fulfillment guy or whatever it is, self-actualization. No, definitely Maslow. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and then the other thing too is we can spend as much time on this, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of the philosophers would say happiness lives in your mind, right? And as long as you're not, and again, we've talked a little bit about this actually, all three of us, and that is, as long as you're not connecting every purchase or a purchase or every individual, okay, because people will let us down, we'll let people down, right? Every transaction that ultimately will bring us happiness. We know, I think we can share that in itself will not be. I think it's what we do regularly. And I also think that what we really come out of this is that truly it's the relationship being with people, it's relationships, it's connectivity. That truly, because often that's what we're talking about. We don't talk about the car that we'll talk about the car that we bought, the pool that we put in, the new house, the new clothes, or whatever. But I think when we start to measure our true conversations, they often, the ones that bring us the most joy, right, will be those are the ones that we've connected with others.
Definitely.
Couldn't
Yeah,
have said it better myself.
yeah.
Thank God I didn't have to try. That was the rich end.
Okay, Rich. Rich, absolutely. Thanks for giving us this good base and grounding us. Alicia, always wonderful. It's great. And I hope that maybe we haven't confused too many people out there. And if we have, then maybe we've done what we went out to do. But anyway, we'll see you all next time. It's great. And for those of you who enjoy what we're doing here, please subscribe and let us know how we're doing. All right. Take care. See you. Thanks for hanging out with us today. We look forward to next week as we cover another cool and fun topic. This podcast was produced by Three Lions Production and sponsored by Con Consulting and Training. Until next time, keep it between the lines.